This isn't sugar. It's not even classified as sugar on food labels, but it spikes your blood sugar higher and faster than table sugar ever could. This is it. 25 pounds of the most consumed and most dangerous carbohydrate in the modern diet. And chances are, you ate some of this today. It's in your breakfast cereal, your bread, your healthy gluten-free snacks, even in hot dogs as the third ingredient. These names probably sound harmless, technical, scientific, but here's what they actually represent. Industrial starches that have been mechanically ground, chemically modified, and processed so extensively that they behave nothing like the starch in a potato your grandmother cooked. Let me show you the scale of this problem. The average American consumes somewhere between 65 and 250 pounds of industrial starch every single year. For young children, it's even worse. 65% of their daily calories come from ultra-processed foods containing these starches. That's 55 pounds of industrial starch annually for a child. And the health consequences? A 2024 meta-analysis published in the BMJ examined 32 different health outcomes across nearly 10 million people. Here's what they found. For every 10% increase in ultra-processed food consumption, foods loaded with these industrial starches, type 2 diabetes risk increases by 12%. Cardiovascular disease risk goes up 4 to 5% for every additional 50 grams per day. Barely a few handfuls. All-cause mortality, your risk of dying from any cause, increases by 2% for every 50 grams daily. Colorectal cancer risk climbs 4% for every 10% of your diet that comes from ultra-processed foods. But here's what makes this even more insidious. These starches are invisible on nutrition labels. When you look at the label, total carbohydrates, 16 grams, dietary fiber, 1 gram, sugars, 0 grams. So what's in those remaining 15 grams? It's starch, industrial, modified, highly processed starch that will spike your blood sugar faster than a candy bar. But it's not listed anywhere on this label unless you read the ingredients. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what these industrial starches are, how they're made, what they do to your body at the cellular level, and most importantly, how to spot them and avoid them. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a food label the same way again. Let's start with understanding what we're actually dealing with. To understand why industrial starch is so dangerous, we need to start with the basics. Starch is a carbohydrate, a chain of glucose molecules linked together. Plants store energy this way. Potatoes, rice, wheat, corn, they all contain starch. When you eat starch, your digestive enzymes break those bonds between glucose molecules, releasing the glucose into your bloodstream for energy. Now here's the critical part. Not all starches are created equal. In nature, starch exists inside plant cells, surrounded by cell walls, fiber, protein, and other compounds. Think of it like glucose locked inside a safe. Your digestive enzymes have to work hard to break through all those barriers to get to it. This takes time. The glucose is released slowly. Your blood sugar rises gradually and stays stable. But industrial starch? It's a completely different story. Industrial starch goes through multiple processing steps that fundamentally change its structure and behavior in your body. First, mechanical grinding. The plant material is pulverized into extremely fine particles. This dramatically increases the surface area available for digestive enzymes to attack. All those protective barriers I mentioned, gone. The fiber, the cell walls, the protein matrix, stripped away. What's left is essentially pre-digested starch particles with incredibly weak bonds between the glucose molecules. It's the difference between a time-release capsule and an immediate-release drug. Same chemical, radically different effect. But the processing doesn't stop there. Industrial starches are also chemically modified, and this is where things get concerning. The food industry uses several chemical processes to alter starch properties to make it thicken better, stay stable in frozen foods, or resist breakdown during processing. Let me walk you through some of the chemicals used. Sodium hypochlorite, that's bleach, the same chemical we regulate as a carcinogen in water supplies. But in food starch, it's self-regulated under something called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. Overexposure is linked to kidney stress and damage to mucosal tissues. Sodium triethyl phosphate, used in phosphate modification. Studies link it to vascular calcification and bone demineralization. It may accelerate the aging process in your arteries. Acetation agents, used to create acetated starches for frozen foods and sauces. These undergo chemical reactions similar to what happens in your body during metabolism, but at industrial scale, with residues that may remain. Now, I want to be clear about something. The European Food Safety Authority evaluated modified starches in 2017 and concluded they posed no safety concern at reported use levels. And some researchers point out that the chemical reactions used in modification, like oxidation and esterification, also occur naturally in human metabolism. But here's my concern, and it's a legitimate one. These chemicals are self-regulated. The long-term studies simply haven't been done. We're conducting a massive, uncontrolled experiment on the entire population, especially on children whose diets are 65% ultra-processed foods. When you combine the mechanical destruction of the food matrix with chemical modification, you create something that barely resembles food anymore. You create what I call a blood sugar rocket. Let me show you what happens when you eat industrial starch versus natural starch. White bread has a glycemic index around 100. That's the same as pure glucose. Some industrial starches actually score higher. They break down faster than glucose itself. You eat the bread. Within 20 to 30 minutes, your glucose rockets up. Your pancreas responds by dumping insulin into your bloodstream to bring that glucose back down. But look what happens at 90 minutes. You crash below your baseline. That's reactive hypoglycemia. And what does that feel like? Hunger, cravings, fatigue, brain fog. So you reach for another snack, and the cycle repeats.
Now look at whole grain bread or legume. The glycemic index of whole wheat bread is around 71. That's 30% lower. The blood sugar rise is gentler. The peak is lower. The glucose stays elevated longer, providing sustained energy. No crash, no reactive hunger. This isn't a small difference. This is the difference between metabolic stress and metabolic stability. Every time you experience one of these dramatic glucose spikes, several things happen in your body. Your cells experience oxidative stress. That's cellular damage from reactive oxygen species. This activates inflammatory pathway, increases inflammatory cytokine production, and damages the lining of your blood vessels. Your cells are flooded with insulin repeatedly. Over time, they become resistant to insulin signal. They downregulate their insulin receptors, like turning down the volume on an alarm that won't stop blaring. This is insulin resistant, and it's the metabolic foundation for type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, cardiovascular disease, and a cascade of other conditions. A 2024 study confirmed that rapid blood glucose increases cause metabolic stress and contribute directly to insulin resistance, independent of total calories consumed. The speed of the glucose rise matters just as much as the total amount. And industrial starches are engineered, unintentionally or not, to produce the fastest glucose release possible. But there's one form of starch that deserves special attention, one that millions of people eat multiple times per week thinking they're making a reasonable choice. I'm talking about potatoes, and specifically what happens when you fry them. Let's talk about potatoes, because the answer to whether they're healthy or dangerous depends entirely on what you do to them. A raw potato contains something called resistant starch type 2. This is crystalline starch with a structure that resists digestive enzymes. It passes through your small intestine intact and reaches your colon, where beneficial bacteria ferment it into short-chain fatty acids. These short-chain fatty acids are gold for your health. They improve insulin sensitivity, reduce inflammation, strengthen your gut barrier, and may even reduce your risk of colorectal cancer. But when you cook a potato, especially when you boil it, mash it, or fry it, something changes at the molecular level. Cooking with heat and water causes gelatinization. The crystalline starch structure breaks down. The granules swell and rupture. That resistant starch, it's no longer resistant. What you're left with is highly digestible starch that your enzymes can access immediately. A boiled potato with the skin on will still cause a moderate glucose spike, but a serving of French fries, you're looking at one of the highest glycemic loads of any food. And that's just the beginning of the problem with fried potato. When you take a potato and fry it at high temperature, above 248 degrees Fahrenheit, something dangerous happens. An amino acid called asparagine, which is naturally present in potato, reacts with reducing sugars at high heat. This is called the Maillard reaction, and it's what gives French fries their golden color and delicious flavor. But it also produces a compound called acrylamide. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies acrylamide as group 2A, probably carcinogenic to humans. Animal studies show clear carcinogenic effects. Human epidemiology is more complicated because measuring dietary acrylamide exposure is difficult, but the toxicology is concerning enough that public health agencies worldwide recommend minimizing it. A 2024 study looked at acrylamide formation in potatoes cooked using different methods. Here are the results. Air frying produced 12.19 micrograms of acrylamide per kilogram of potato. Deep frying produced 8.94 micrograms per kilogram. Oven frying, baking at lower temperatures, produced the lowest amount, 7.43 micrograms per kilogram. But another 2024 study looked at actual food service conditions, restaurants and fast food chains. The numbers were dramatically higher. Deep-fried potatoes contained 293 micrograms per kilogram. Air-fried potatoes contained only 32 micrograms per kilogram. That's nearly a tenfold difference. The researchers calculated cancer risk and found that air-fried potatoes showed no carcinogenic risk at standard portion sizes, while deep-fried potatoes exceeded safe thresholds. Now, I want to put this in perspective. Occasional consumption of French fries isn't going to give you cancer. The risk comes from frequent long-term exposure. Dose and frequency matter. But if you're eating fries 3 or 4 times a week, which many people do, you're accumulating significant acrylamide exposure over time. The good news? There are proven ways to reduce acrylamide formation. Studies show that soaking potatoes in water before frying significantly reduces acrylamide. The reduction was statistically significant with a p-value of 0.029. Blanching potatoes before frying helps. Choosing potato varieties with lower reducing sugar content helps. And most importantly, cooking at lower temperatures and avoiding overbrowning makes a massive difference. But there's one more thing you need to know about fried potatoes and industrial starches. They're rarely consumed alone. Ultra-processed foods, the stuff that makes up the majority of calories in the modern Western diet, follow a remarkably consistent formula. Industrial starches make up 55 to 75% of the calories. Seed oils, refined vegetable oils like soybean, corn, canola, make up 20 to 35%. That's it, 3 ingredients, recombined in endless variations. Potato chips, 65% starch, 30% oil. Crackers, 70% starch, 25% oil. French fries, 80% starch, 15% oil. Instant noodles, pre-gelatinized starch particles with oil and salt. White bread, 75% starch, 15% seed oils, plus some added sugar.
Here's what concerns me most. When you combine industrial starch with seed oils under high heat, which is exactly how these products are made, you create what researchers call a compounded toxic soup. The high heat causes oxidation of the polyunsaturated fats in seed oils, producing lipid peroxides and aldehyde, toxic compounds that damage your cells. The Maillard reaction between sugars and proteins produces advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, that accelerate aging and inflammation. And the acrylamide from high heat starch reactions adds another layer of concern. It's not just one problem, it's multiple problems interacting and amplifying each other. Now, I want to be scientifically honest with you about something. When researchers conduct randomized controlled trials under strict metabolic ward condition, where they control every calorie and match fiber content, the differences between refined starches and whole food carbohydrates are sometimes smaller than you'd expect. Isocaloric studies, where total calories are matched, show moderate effect. But here's the critical finding. When researchers let people eat ad libitum, eat as much as they want, the ultra-processed food diets consistently lead to increased energy intake. A landmark 2019 NIH study found that people eating ultra-processed foods consumed an average of 500 more calories per day compared to an unprocessed food diet, even though both diets were equally palatable and matched for nutrients. The result? The ultra-processed group gained 2 pounds in 2 weeks. The unprocessed group lost 2 pounds. Same research subjects, same metabolic wards, same nutrients on paper. The difference was the food matrix and the speed of digestion. Ultra-processed foods bypass your satiety mechanism, They're engineered to be hyper-palatable and calorie-dense. You eat more before your brain registers fullness. Let's talk about the strongest evidence we have, the 2024 Umbrella Review published in the British Medical Journal. This wasn't just one study. It was a systematic review of systematic reviews and meta-analyses. The researchers examined 32 different health outcomes across nearly 10 million participants. Here's what they found, and I'm reading directly from the paper. We found moderate certainty evidence for increased mortality, cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes associated with ultra-processed food consumption. Let me translate that. Moderate certainty in scientific terms means the evidence is strong enough to act on. It's not preliminary, it's not speculative. Cardiovascular disease increased 4 to 5% for every 50 grams per day of ultra-processed food consumption. All-cause mortality increased 2% for every 50 grams per day of ultra-processed food consumption. Mental health disorders, including depression and anxiety, showed associations with higher ultra-processed food intake. A separate study, 2024, published in The Lancet, followed over 206,000 participants across 3 major U.S. cohorts. They found consistent associations with ultra-processed food consumption in cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease, and stroke. Here's what struck me most when reading these studies. Quote, not a single study reported any association with ultra-processed food intake and a beneficial health outcome. Not one. Every single outcome examined showed either harm or no effect. None showed benefit. Now, I know this might feel overwhelming, but here's why I'm telling you this. Knowledge is power. Once you understand what these foods are, how they're made, and what they do to your body, you can make informed choices, and you can protect yourself and your family. The first step to avoiding industrial starches is learning to spot them on labels. Here are the terms you're looking for in the ingredients list. Modified food starch, modified corn starch, maltodextrin, wheat starch when it says modified, potato starch in processed foods, not whole potatoes, tapioca starch in ultra-processed products, corn starch when highly processed. If you see any of these in the first 5 ingredients, that product is likely dominated by industrial starch. Now here's a trick I use to calculate hidden starch. Look at the nutrition facts panel, find total carbohydrates, subtract dietary fiber, subtract sugars. What's left is starch. Total carbohydrates 24 grams, dietary fiber 1 gram, sugars 2 grams, hidden starch 21 grams. If that number is above 10 grams per serving and you see modified starches in the ingredients, you're looking at a blood sugar rocket. Where do these starches hide? Everywhere. Gluten-free products, because manufacturers replace wheat with modified starches to get the right texture. Baby formulas as a thickening agent. Processed meats like hot dogs and deli turkey as a binder and filler to add bulk cheaply. Instant foods, mashed potatoes, noodles, soups, because the starch is pre-gelatinized for quick rehydration. Gravies and sauces as thickeners. Low-fat dairy products to improve texture and mouthfeel. Even in healthy protein bars and meal replacement shakes. The food industry uses industrial starches because they're cheap, functional, and government subsidized. They cost about 20 cents per pound, but now you know what to look for. Let me give you specific evidence-based alternatives that will lower your glycemic load and improve your metabolic health. For bread and grains, instead of white bread with a glycemic index around 100, choose whole wheat bread, glycemic index around 71. That's a 30% reduction in glucose impact. Even better, choose sourdough bread. The fermentation process produces acids that slow starch digestion and lower the glycemic response. Sprouted grain bread is another excellent option. The sprouting process breaks down some of the starch and increases nutrient bioavailability. Or consider legume-based products, bean pastas, chickpea bread. Legumes are high in protein and fiber, which dramatically blunt the glucose spike. For potatoes, instead of French fries or instant mashed potatoes, choose boiled potatoes with the skin on. The skin contains fiber and resistant starch that stays intact even after cooking. Here's a science-backed trick. After boiling potatoes, let them cool in the refrigerator. This allows some of the gelatinized starch to retrograde, recrystallize into resistant starch remains. Studies show this process can reduce the digestible starch content by 20 to 30%. If you must have fries, make them at home. Cut potatoes into wedges, soak them in water for 30 minutes to remove excess starch, then bake them in the oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. This reduces acrylamide formation by up to 50% compared to deep frying. For pasta, instead of instant noodles or white pasta,
pasta? Choose whole grain pasta. Or even better, pasta made from legumes, lentil pasta, chickpea pasta, black bean pasta. The protein and fiber content slows digestion dramatically. And here's another trick that works for pasta, rice, and potatoes. Cook them, cool them overnight, then reheat them. This cooking, cooling, reheating cycle maximizes resistant starch formation. For breakfast cereals, instead of processed cereals with extruded grains, choose steel-cut oats or rolled oats, not instant oats, which are pre-gelatinized. Better yet, make overnight oats. Soaking oats overnight in milk or yogurt with some chia seeds increases the resistant starch content and adds beneficial bacteria if you use yogurt. Top with berries, nuts, and a small amount of honey or maple syrup if you need sweetness. You get fiber, protein, healthy fats, and antioxidants, not just starch. The general principles that work. Choose intact food matrices. Whole grains, beans, lentils, and minimally processed foods retain their natural structure, fiber, and protective compounds. Add protein, fat, and fiber to every meal. These slow gastric emptying and blunt the glucose spike. Even if you're eating a higher carb food, pairing it with protein or healthy fat dramatically reduces the glycemic impact. Cook at lower temperatures when possible. Higher heat means more acrylamide, more AGEs, and more lipid oxidation. Use the cooling trick. Cook starchy foods, cool them, and reheat them. This simple step increases resistant starch significantly. Pre-soak potatoes if frying. Just 30 minutes of soaking removes excess starch and reducing sugars, cutting acrylamide formation substantially. I want to be very clear about something. This is not about perfection. This is not about never eating a French fry again or eliminating every processed food from your life. A 2024 review concluded that eating ultra-processed foods occasionally isn't likely to be a health concern. The key word is occasionally. The problem is when 55 to 70% of your diet or your children's diet comes from these foods. That's when the metabolic damage accumulates. Health isn't binary. It's a spectrum. Small, consistent improvements compound over time. If you replace just 2 servings per day of industrial starch products with whole food alternatives, you've made a significant change. If you reduce your fried potato consumption from 4 times per week to once per week, you've dramatically lowered your acrylamide exposure. If you start reading labels and choosing products with fewer than 5 ingredients, you'll naturally avoid most industrial starches. There's also a bigger conversation we need to have as a society. Why are these products so ubiquitous and cheap? Government subsidies make corn and soy, the raw materials for industrial starches and seed oils, artificially inexpensive. That's our tax dollars making junk food cheap and whole foods expensive. Labeling regulations allow for modified food starch to hide in the fine print, uncounted in the main nutrition facts. And food manufacturers are allowed to use chemical modification processes that have never been tested long-term in humans under the self-regulated GRAS system. But there's hope. Consumer demand for clean label ingredients is driving change. More companies are reformulating products to use simpler ingredients. More people are asking questions. And that's exactly what we need, an informed public that demands better. Industrial and modified starches spike your blood sugar faster than table sugar, with glycemic indices at or above 100, causing dramatic glucose and insulin swings that drive metabolic dysfunction over time. Processing destroys the food matrix. The mechanical grinding and chemical modification strip away protective barriers, making the starch instantly accessible to digestive enzymes. You're essentially eating pre-digested glucose. Fried potato products add a second layer of danger. The combination of rapid starch digestion plus acrylamide formation from high-heat cooking makes French fries and chips particularly problematic when consumed frequently. The combination is the killer. Industrial starch plus seed oils plus high heat creates a synergistic toxic effect. Oxidized fats, advanced glycation end products, acrylamide, and blood sugar chaos all at once. The evidence is overwhelming. A 2024 umbrella review of nearly 10 million people found no beneficial health outcomes from ultra-processed food consumption. Only increased risk of mortality, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, mental health disorders, and more. Every time you choose whole foods over processed foods, you're choosing metabolic stability over metabolic metabolic stress. You're choosing sustained energy over blood sugar crashes. You're choosing long-term health over short-term convenience. I know this information can feel overwhelming, but I want you to feel empowered, not paralyzed. You understand the math. Total carbs minus fiber minus sugar equals hidden starch. You know which terms to look for. Modified food starch, maltodextrin, modified cornstarch. You have specific swaps, whole grains instead of refined grains, boiled and cooled potatoes instead of fries, legume-based products instead of white bread. You know the tricks: cooking and cooling to increase resistant starch, soaking potatoes before frying, choosing lower temperature cooking method. Within a month, you'll have transformed your diet without feeling deprived or overwhelmed. And if you have children, this matters even more. Their bodies are developing. Their metabolic systems are being programmed. The dietary patterns they establish now will influence their health for decades. Teaching them to recognize real food from ultra-processed food is one of the most valuable gifts you can give them. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be informed, to question, to read labels, to make conscious choices, because your body deserves real food. Your cells deserve stable blood sugar. Your metabolism deserves a break from the constant assault of industrial starches, seed oils, and chemical additive. The dose makes the poison. Occasional consumption in the context of an overall healthy diet is fine. But when ultra-processed foods become the foundation of your diet, when industrial starches show up in meal after meal, day after day, that's when the damage accumulates. Here's what I want you to do after watching this video. 1. Check your pantry. Find 3 products with modified starches and look for alternatives. 2. Do the label math on one product today. Total carbs minus fiber minus sugar. See how much hidden starch is there. 3. Make one swap this week. Replace white bran with whole grain. Choose boiled potatoes instead of fries. Try legume pasta instead of white pasta. 4. Share this information. Send this video to someone you care about. Post about it. Talk about it. We change food systems by changing demand. This isn't about fear. It's about freedom. The freedom to make informed choices. The freedom to understand what you're putting in your body. The freedom to reclaim your metabolic health. Industrial starches aren't going to disappear tomorrow, but your consumption of them can change today. And that changes everything. Thank you for watching. All of the studies I referenced in this video are linked in the description below. If you found this valuable, subscribe for more evidence-based education. And remember, your health is not inevitable. It's a series of choices. Make them count.